Greetings. I'm Suzanne Titkemeyer, and you may know me from No Longer Quivering, where I had a column that I wrote for 10 years plus about the evangelical quiverful movement. Now, I still talk about them on Taco Tuesdays, which is Tuesdays, and it's not about tacos, but it's about totalitarian, authoritative church organizations, which is what I'm talking about many times when I'm talking about these non denominational churches that are kind of making it up as they go along. That is my jam. That is my nightmare. Okay, so on Fridays, and today is a Friday, I do book reviews, and it is always having to do with books from that world, from the world of quiverful, of non-denominational taco churches. And again, that'll be one I'm doing today, but there are a few things that are different about this one. Okay, let me throw this out here. These are just my opinions. That's how I come up with what I say, just my opinions. They're not anybody else's opinions or what I've reached, just doing my own thing. And I'm going to say this because the book I'm talking about today is called Decluttering Your Marriage by a gentleman by the name of Doug Wilson. Who is Doug Wilson? He has a church up in Moscow, Idaho, that place that Brian Coburg and his whole thing is about. His church is up there. He has St. Andrew's College that he apparently runs. He's got his own little fiefdom thing up there. And usually his books just make me howl with laughter the times I've read them because Doug is extremely verbose in how he writes, okay? And I don't really care for his style. Sometimes I've laughed at some of the things he said. Some have been genuinely funny, some of them ironically funny, like the potato salad sequence in his romance novel, The Man in the Dark, and how incredibly unscientific much of what he says in the sex robot book, Rod Sally Rod, just strikes me. So there you go. But I wanted to say about that before I begin the review that you can't really bully the opinions of other people. And I'm talking about this on all levels, okay? About bullying and about people's opinions. Here's the thing. Opinions are opinions. We all have them. I have them. You have them. And opinions are neither here nor there. They're not wrong. They're not right. They're just opinions. Why that matters is Doug Wilson has hired a defamation attorney to sue the crap out of various people at various media organizations who've been writing about him and his church. Well, here's the thing about that. Defamation per se is a very high bar to meet. If you don't believe me, go watch Emily D. Baker. She talks about this quite a bit, how hard it is to get a conviction on defamation per se, even if the person is a journalist. If they're giving an opinion and it's an opinion piece, there's not a lot you can do about that. If they are stating something as fact and they have proof of it, there's not a lot you can do about that either. And what I do know about journalism from my years of writing is that if you are careful to source everything you do, hence why all reporters I know have notebooks where they keep track of everything that they're writing about and all of their research. God knows I've done that too. So I'm kind of curious to see what's going to happen with that with Doug Wilson, because when I used to write about Wilson for No Longer Quivering, I would take some words of Doug's and say, hey, this is not right, and this is why. This is why I think this is wrong. It was never um, stating that, making up things about him. It was using his own words. So he's going to have a really hard time, I think, winning any kind of defamation per se case against any journalist, any opinion writer, any blogger. It's going to be extremely hard. And not only that, extremely, extremely extremely expensive. And I would like to remind a certain somebody, not Doug, that when you try to get a restraining order or cease and desist or anything like that on a person in another country, cough, cough, me, that you have to go through the legal system of that country, not the country you are in. And if you don't have the money to do that, you should just go ahead and hang it up because nobody is going to respond to that. So anyway, I've said all I'm going to say about Doug and his various lawsuits. Um, I downloaded the book Decluttering Your Marriage, and I was disappointed because with Doug Wilson in some of his books, I always look forward to the more insane pieces that strike me as word salad and parsing them and unpacking them. But I gotta throw this out there. Decluttering Your Marriage was not actually a bad marriage book. I was really shocked and horrified. I read through it. I only took notes on the first half because that was really the only part that I was going to invest that kind of time in. Because once I realized this was not the typical Doug Wilson word salad, it certainly did not make any sense to do an intensive review of it. So here's my overview. Doug starts with a quote that I don't necessarily disagree with entirely. Marriage is fundamentally a matter of obedience and disobedience. Obedience, disobedience. Except that I think that his idea of marriage and obedience, marriage and disobedience is far different than mine. Obedience, disobedience. If you get married, if you want to have any kind of marriage, any kind of lasting marriage, and I think that I can safely say I'm at least a slight authority on this. I've been married for 37 years and no divorces. There have been fights, there's been threats hurled, sometimes just by me. But you if you reword that slightly from obedience and disobedience to saying getting along, forcing yourself to get along, forcing yourself to keep short offense lists, that's true. You have to decide, are you going to be obedient to the law of being one half of a couple, a partnership, that you have to resolve your differences. You can't just walk away from them. And that's what I mean by I approve of that. I don't approve of that as obedience, disobedience. You're the man, I'm the woman, blah, blah, blah. I watched the Barbie film and because I got the biggest kick out of that film. It summed up this whole obedience, matriarchy, patriarchy, and how it should really actually be plumb middle between the two. And how far to each side that is, that depends upon your own thoughts on that. If extreme obedience works for you and you're both in agreement, go for it. Okay. Doug mentions sin and he talks about a story about socks that I was kind of lost at. It didn't really work, I thought, as an analogy. And the notion of sin is such a vague one that I don't think you can actually use that and say, oh, sin, 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 like a lot of people do. He ranks marriage as the top blessing that God can bestow upon you, completely ignoring the words of Paul, where Paul said it was better to stay single. And he said this: marriage under the blessing of God is God's greatest earthly gift. It can be. Marriage can be a blessing or a curse, and a lot of it depends upon the two people that are in that marriage and whether or not they have the grace and humility to listen to the other person and to make changes at various times. And whether or not they have good communication skills, I believe that takes precedence too. But Doug goes ahead and turns it as an exasperation too. And it can be an exasperation. Then he says the smartest thing in the entire book. Quote, marriage amplifies who you are. It's very true. Um, it just amplifies who you are. That's one of the things that post-stroke I have had to learn, that sometimes hard times really amplify who you are and what your thought processes are. And it can be really awful for people having to go through some of that. He equates bad marriage to a crowded basement or closet. Just like we don't like to pick up after ourselves and clean out those sort of things. And me, I don't do well if the room is dirty. I'm one of those people where I can handle a little bit of chaos, but the minute it devolves into a hoarding type situation, my ADD kicks in and I'm sitting there just staring at horror struck instead of saying, okay, right now I'm going to pick up everything that's on the chair and put it away. 10 minutes from now, I'm going to pick up everything on the bed. Instead of breaking it down into units, I become just completely overwhelmed and shut down. A lot of people do. That is a way a lot of people do that. And marriage, just like being in a dirty closet, it can challenge us. He goes by quoting Paul next, humbling ourselves, seeking forgiveness, putting right. And then he blames sin again. I'm not necessarily going to go there with that and blame anybody for sin. Only spiritual people can connect to others and not be annoyed. I disagree with that. While the things in this book aren't necessarily 100% wrong, and it's the most respectful of all the books that Doug has done, I don't agree with everything in it. Okay. People who connect to other people have that talent. I know of many people in all walks of life, faithful, not faithful, Muslim, whatever, Buddhist, whatever, that could connect. And those people have that gift. Some of us are just awkward and weird. I had to admit after seeing the Barbie movie that I was weird Barbie. And you know something? I'm 63 years old. I'm okay with being weird Barbie. My husband is okay with me being weird Barbie. He knows that's exactly who I am, and that's how my mind works. He talks about motivations. And it isn't explained if that's for you or the other person. Your motivations are what they are. And I think it's a good idea every now and then to take a good look at what your motivations are and why you have those motivations and or expectations. Because that's one thing about marriage, I will say. It will humble you and completely redo your expectations if you're not continually looking at what's going on within your mind, okay? Including what your motivations are towards that other person, towards your partner, because that person is your partner. You guys are yoked together. And Doug actually gave a very good piece of advice here. If you are annoyed, keep your mouth shut, no nagging. Nagging is counterproductive in marriage. It just is. It doesn't work whether it's the husband nagging the wife nagging the husband, who it is. It just does not work. It's not a good thing at all to be doing. It's never a bad thing to talk to your partner, but you have to take that annoyance, that anger, and you have to remove that and put it aside before you can engage and talk and say, hey, you really hurt me when you said that. Or why are you thinking, talking, whatever that? You have to remove that, and there can't be nagging. There has to be open, honest communication. So this book, like Lori Alexander's book, doesn't always have toxic bits, but at the same time, just like every other book on marriage in the fundamentalist world, evangelical world, the fundangelical world, there is absolutely no space for conversation between the husband and wife. And communication is the most important thing, and it's the big thing that they miss. Doug says to bite your tongue, to be humble and contrite. You know, that's not a bad way to go about it if you have to have those conversations, those hard conversations. And you have to start gently and say, you know, I'm sorry if I offended you, but this is how my mind works and this is what I'm thinking. And it was not an attempt to hurt you. Can you tell me why that hurt you so much? I mean, do you have something in yourself that like a trigger that's the reason that that's going on? I mean, you have to really unpack these things. And again, just talk to your spouse. Talk to your spouse. That's the biggest thing I can tell you. Talk to your spouse and know that what's going on with you and your spouse is it's normal. It's normal to not live in perfect harmony. You have to keep adjusting, just like a poorly fitting dress. You have to keep adjusting it until you have it altered just right for you. And I'm going to say this, I'm going to throw you guys a bone out there of happiness and of hope. It gets older, the more you go, oh, ding, it gets easier the longer you go on to do those things. You keep short offense lists. You don't mess with anybody. You just breathe in, breathe out, move on. Huge thing, huge thing. So biting your tongue is not necessarily a bad thing either. Just because you're looking at your spouse, boy, wow, he was a jerk there. Thinking that is way different than letting it spill out of your mouth. Not all of your thoughts are necessary to tell to your other significant other. You just don't do that. Then Doug moves on to the scripture, love is patient, love is kind. And that whole section on love is a very good way to go about handling your marriage. Okay? Another good quote. You're not winning when someone on your team loses. Again, it goes back to biting your tongue, being humble, being contrite, being part of the team, being together. You don't want the other person to lose. You want both of you to win. You want both of you to do well, to develop time together, to have the freedom to talk about anything with each other, the freedom to make mistakes and say, I missed the boat there. There's so many things I could extrapolate on with that. It's something that I've had to do myself for years. Doug says, develop a spirit of meekness. No bringing up the past, no accusations of the past, and don't be tempted. Now, I don't know if it's possible to go through life without being tempted. We're all tempted for different things and over different things. But the other ones, not a bad idea. Particularly the no bringing up the past, no accusations when you're having your discussions, your unfriendly discussions. He talked about the sin of pride creating long-term marriage problems. There's something to that. That's one thing that I can honestly say for marriage. It either humbles you or it destroys you. You have to have that flexibility to see that when you've done something wrong, you need to apologize, breathe in, breathe out, move on, as I like to say. But then Doug does something really toxic. He illustrates that with a tale about overspending. I am sick to death of this trope, not just in the Christian world, but in so many worlds, of it being the woman overspending on various things. I've thought about this a lot. I think a lot of times we as women, and I'm not speaking for everybody, this is just people that I can observe that I've been part of their lives. We tend to see the benefit of things that men don't see. Example, the example in my own life would be the other day we went to Maxi Pali. Maxi Pali here is a Walmart subsidiary. They sell all the same things that Walmart sells, okay? You can even get great value grape jelly there. Great value spaghetti sauce, whatever great value thing you want, they usually have it, but not all the time. As we're walking in there, my husband says, "What do you got on your list?" Because he's all about lists. And if you know anything about me, I'm an artist. I'm about anything but lists. Even though I do sometimes write them. I write tons of notes about everything under the sun. I'm researching, but I don't do lists. Lists and I are just not it. So we're walking in and he says, "What's on your list?" And I said, "I need to get two giant Rubbermaid coats with the lids, and I need to get one of the cheap round dish pans they have." He's like, "Why do you need those things? Those are expensive here." I said, "Number one, I need the crates for my sweaters that I just brought back from the States that will never get worn here. They need to be stored away in a way that is secure. Because that's one bad thing about living here in Central America is that bugs get into everything. And I've learned that those big Rubbermaid totes with the lids are a better way to store everything. If you put it into a cabinet, if you stick it in a cardboard box, bugs are just going to get into it. I don't care how many times a week you have your house sprayed. It just is what it is. I've learned a great deal about things like that since I've been living here. And once I explained my thinking and all of those things, including the big dish pan, which was to soak my feet in for Epsom salts. I want a bathtub so bad, so bad. But to put a bathtub in here, I would have to go ahead with my long-term plans. I'm planning on putting a sunroom here. And when that happens and the wall gets pushed out another 10 feet, that will happen in the bathroom and I will have a tub put in. I don't have a tub, I have only a shower. So I said, "Look, as many problems I've been having with my ankle, I really need a way to soak it every now and then. So isn't it easier to just spend 2 mil, roughly like 360, to get a big plastic pan to stick it in the bathroom, stick it under my shower bench and pull it out when I need it." Once I explained to him my thinking on these processes and everything, he was like, "Oh, okay." Instead of his at first reaction, which was, "You're spending money, you're spending money." You have to explain these things sometimes to men because they don't get why you might want to have more than one bath mat or why you might need bins to put your clothing in. They don't always get that stuff. I tease my husband all the time and tell him that if it were up to him, he would live like a bear with furniture. That doesn't work for me. I need things like containers, storage containers. People who know me well will tell you that as much of a fly by the seat of my pants artist I am, I frequently like to look at PORN. But the PORN I look at are organizer magazines that come out in the United States in January. That is my PORN, not legitimate PORN. I love to look at organizer things because it appeals to my ADD. And sometimes I actually learn enough about how to organize certain things that I do something that's helpful that I've picked up from there. So my husband has had to realize with me is when I say, "Hey, I'm going to get XYZ," there's usually reasonings behind it. It's very seldom is it, oh, very seldom is it that. Okay. And Doug has a bunch of tales about Pharisees. And he says that many Christians today are Pharisees. I'm not going to disagree with him about that either, because I think a lot of them are. And what am I talking about when I'm talking about Pharisees Christians? It may be different than what Doug is thinking, but I'm talking about the type that will see you do something that they disagree with that isn't even covered in the Bible. Say, example, today I'm wearing a sleeveless tunic and a pair of shorts that go to my knee and a very loose tunic. I have had Christians in the past come up to me, usually these taco types, and say, you're sinning. You're being immodest by showing your bare arms and your legs knees down. It doesn't say that in the Bible. It's not at all what the modesty talk is about. The modesty talk is about not showing off in super expensive clothes among the church members. This is my shocked Pikachu face. So I will agree with him on that, but I don't think we actually have the same definition of what a Pharisee like Christian is. Then he says this about Jesus in most modern language. And I just died laughing because this was actually kind of funny. Quote, the hookers and crack addicts are getting into heaven before you guys. He's paraphrasing what Jesus said in the more modern vernacular. And I kind of liked when I read that because there's a lot of truth there too. There are a lot of Pharisees, Christians out there that just want to throw rocks at anybody that doesn't live exactly like they live. And that's really sad because there's any variety of ways to live, and what's right for you may not be right for your neighbor. And if you're saying, oh, you can't do that, that's sinful, and it's something not covered by the Bible, like, look, I'm drinking a Diet Coke. I know people that would say that that is a sin. This is my lone Diet Coke of the day. It's not a sin. Is it healthy? Probably not. But is it me? Yes. I'm a grown adult. Okay. And then he said this, and I laughed over this one too. Here's another one that is actually kind of true. He talked about the crack cocaine of self congratulations. People who do a lot of self congratulations and are constantly trying to get positive strokes from the crowd. It is like crack cocaine because you become very addicted to that and it starts to take over your entire world. I'm sorry, birds keep flying right above my head. I've got a whole bunch of parrots up in my grapefruit tree right now. So the crack cocaine of self congratulations. And I see that a lot in the old church. My old church is like, well, thank goodness I know to do X, Y, Z. X, Y, Z. I'm so much better than this person, that person. I'm going to heaven. You see that a lot, and it's very wrong. And I've seen that kind of pride wreck marriages too. It's like, I'm so better. They're so awful. I think the prime example of that I can remember is a lady who was a friend of mine who's passed on now. She she used to talk smack about her husband all the time. And I would try to very gently remind her that that is not the way it goes. That's not how you do things. And she talked about her husband not being masculine enough. She talked about this all the time. And she was picking up some of these pastors that are like all into the hyper masculinity thing, who are into the hyper masculinity thing to the level that you start to wonder about their own sexuality because only somebody doubling down that hard on masculinity. It's like these self congratulators. They have such a small sense of who they are that they have to constantly be virtue signaling and say, I am this person, even though you know they must be struggling to come up like that. He talked about people playing games and pushing buttons with their spouses and knowing exactly where the buttons are. Well, yeah. Once you've been married to someone for a while, you know exactly where all the trigger buttons are and you know exactly how to push them. He claims that eye rolls and tones of voices are button pushing too. They can be. They can be for certain things. So the last little thing that I took notes on in this was Doug quote, you cannot use children as a way to avoid becoming your own person. Hallelujah. Amen. I agree with that so much. I can't even begin to tell you how much I agree with that. I love my children. I love my children. Raising them was not easy because of this very issue. And I was always chafing against some of the restrictions of motherhood because I just wanted to paint all day or do something else, do crafts all day. I always wanted to do those things. And there was kind of this dichotomy where I would put that aside to play mother. So many times in these quiverful churches, I've seen women, their entire identity is around being a mother. Now, you do have to be a hands-on mother. You just have to. And you have to suck it up and do it because if you don't, you end up with some pretty drastically warped individuals. But at the same time, you have to start allowing your kids a certain measure of responsibilities and not just responsibilities, but let me just, how should I term this best? You have to allow them the leeway to be their own persons and them discovering who their own persons is won't happen if you're hovering over them every second. Those are the things that happen when they're playing or they're alone. Those are the things that happen. Those are the things when they're reading something and they're thinking, oh, yeah, I agree with that, or that's a bunch of horse hockey. You have to allow them the space to become their own person. And it's a lot easier if you know who you are and your own person to help anybody else. If you don't know who you are and you're subsuming yourself into this role and thinking, good mothers do XYZ, instead of realizing that motherhood, like marriage, is not one size fits all. It's just not. And knowing who you are is the most valuable gift you can give to your husband and your children. And taking time away, me time, to do things that fulfill your soul is important too. I used to paint every Sunday afternoon and say, don't bug me when I'm painting. I also had a full stained glass studio in my home, in my garage, that I used to go in there and work with the glass. Even though it sometimes horrifically it horrifically made my kids mad because I would walk out and be bleeding on my leg and say, "You're bleeding." "Oh, am I?" Or there was something going on, like the time I walked out with 2 different pairs of shoes on because I was thinking about going in there to do stained glass and stuff. So if you know who you are and you take time to make that happen, you're gonna be happier in your marriage, your spouse is gonna be happier, your children will be happier. It'll be a better experience. So at that point, I just quit reading the book in depth. I just skimmed through it. There was nothing outrageous there. What I've read you is the only really outrageous parts, and some of those outrageous parts are actually true. There's not a lot there that I disagreed with. I disagreed with the whole idea of sin over and over and over, talking about sin, because, we're not really supposed to be looking at the sins of everybody else. We're supposed to be concentrating on our own sins. And what sin actually is different from person to person, I think. Not everything is forbidden for everybody. So that's really between you and God, how you handle that. It really is. So now since I've done my horrible review, and it wasn't so horrible because it wasn't a bad book. I want to talk about a good book. I usually try to talk about one good book while I'm reviewing. The good one I want to talk about this time is Stay Interesting by Jonathan Goldsmith. I read this book in just maybe 3 or 4 days. It wasn't a hard read. And Jonathan Goldsmith, if you don't know, he's the guy who played the most interesting man in the world for the Dos Equis commercials. I had no intention on downloading or reading any kind of book by him until popped up on Grunge or Looper or one of those sites. 10 things you didn't know about the most interesting man in the world. And I started watching that. And I was like, because it just popped up one day when I was strolling through YouTube. And they started talking about his autobiography. And I was sold because if you know me at all, you know that I'm all about second acts, about people screwing up badly, themselves up, brushing the dirt away and going on to something bigger and better than their failure. I'm all about that. Goldsmith did that. He was an actor in Hollywood for many, many years. I would say he wasn't super successful. I'm sorry, my hair's driving me crazy. I washed it. I can't do anything with it. Um, so his book was all about that journey that took him to Dos Equis to become the most interesting man in the world. And it's a wild journey because he was quite rebellious growing up. And there are a lot of things in there that were just kind of squishy and weird. I was just laughing uproariously at. And it was just a very interesting book. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to spoiler parts of it, but there are parts that you might want to skip over because they are pretty outrageous, particularly if you're a Christian and you think those things are sinful. But I read the entire thing and loved it, just laughed so hard over so much of the just downright ironic and crazy parts of his life growing up and other things. So there you go. There you go. Next week, I don't know. I don't know. I may take a break from fundamentalist books and do some other ones. Right now, I am reading Greg Olson's The Amish Wife, which does nominally have to do with conservative Christianity, but here's where it's unusual. It's about a Mormon serial killer. And Greg Olson wrote the original book on this case, and this is revisiting it more than 30 years later and trying to come to some kind of resolution to who this guy was that was a murderer and who all he killed in the Schwartzengruber, I think it was the Schwartzengruber families in rural Ohio, that Mennonite group that's in rural Ohio. It's now they're kind of scattered. Some of them are up in Michigan and other places. So there you go. I may have to, oh, I forgot about this. Okay. A book that I have that I want to finish reading, that I want to do a review of, is called The Woman They Wanted. And it's by Josh Harris's I Kissed Dating Goodbye, about his ex-wife. It's her biography, her autobiography, what she lived through. And it is just it's unbelievable. It's outrageous. Unbelievable. So I'm going to try to do that one next week. Gonna go through that. Yeah. Maybe the Amish wife. I don't know. Okay, you guys, I'm going to go ahead and go. Like I said, these are just my opinions, such as they are. I was extremely disappointed in Doug because I was looking forward to crazy. Doug has a book about food that I just laughed out loud with every quote that I've read. So I may go download that one and take a look at it too. I don't agree with him on much, but this book that I was doing today, it was lacking. It was lacking a lot of the usual stuff that makes a Doug Wilson book a lot of fun. It just was. And not a bad way to run your marriage necessarily. So take that sin out. Take that definition of sin out and obedience. Love you guys. See you later.